Okay, it looks like we're at 6:30, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to say hello and welcome to the Southwest Capitol Highway Construction Open House. This evening, the project team will provide some details on the upcoming construction impacts and the schedule, as well as some information about the design and the history of this project. Participants will have the opportunity to ask some questions, as well as to provide some feedback to the team. My name is Jen Gray O'Connor, and tonight I'll be serving as your facilitator. We're going to go ahead and start with just a brief overview of our agenda and some meeting guidelines, and then we'll get into some introductions of the folks on our team. First, I want to let you know that we'll start with some introductions from our team, followed by a presentation by our project manager, Steve Sigathy. And after our presentation, I'll help read some of your questions, and the team will hopefully answer them or direct you to the right resources. Okay, first, let me just give you some meeting guidelines. So tonight we're going to meet to provide information about these upcoming construction impacts. We're going to answer some questions, and then we're going to hear some public input. If you'd like to provide a comment or ask a question, please use the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. If at any time you're having any trouble with that Q&A section, you can always send a chat message to our team. And just as a note, that chat will only be visible to our team. And so we'll try and work with you to elevate your question to the Q&A function, or we'll just go ahead and read it out loud. There will be additional ways for you to leave comments or ask questions for our team. You can always email us at capitolhighway@portlandoregon.gov. And just a brief note, Capitol is CAPITOL highway@portlandoregon.gov, or you can always call our hotline, and that number is 503-823-2516. And if that was too quick, I know that Steve during his presentation will have a slide up that also gives you that information. Also, please be aware that all of our meetings are going to be recorded. Okay, and so with that said, I'd like to launch into our introduction. So we'll start with the Capital Programs Manager for the Portland Bureau of Transportation, Steve Sigathy.
Thanks a lot, Jen. So starting off intros here, Steve Sigathy. I'm a Capital Program Manager at PBOT, and I have been the overall project manager on the Capitol Highway project starting in 2016. So very thrilled to be at this moment, and glad to have people in attendance tonight.
Great, and can we hear from Dan?
Hi, everybody. Dan Sosnowski. I'm the construction manager working for PBOT on the project. So I'll be out in the field and helping to manage the contractor and all of the work going on in your neighborhood. Thanks.
Great. And then how about Wendy?
Hi, I'm Wendy Cawley. I'm PBOT's city traffic engineer. I was the design engineer on the project. I'm passing it off now to Jeremy Finkel, who will be working on the construction piece, but he's out of town right now. So you'll probably hear his name a lot as the project goes on.
Terrific. Next, can we hear from Lisa?
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here tonight. I'm Lisa Moshinsky. I'm the project manager for the Bureau of Environmental Services.
Great. And then could we also hear from Ning?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ning Jian. I also work at Bureau of Environmental Services. I'll be serving as the public contact during construction for all the stormwater facility constructions.
Thank you, Ning. Next, Anna.
Hello, everybody. I'm Anna Brophy. I'm with Environmental Services. I'm the construction manager for the Bureau of Environmental Services working with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Cedar.
Hi, I'm Cedar Nichols. I work for Environmental Services, and I'll be on site doing inspection work for the stormwater quality facilities and infrastructure.
Great. And Katie.
Hi, I'm Katie Asher. I work with the Portland Water Bureau, and I do outreach for our larger construction projects. So I'd be a contact for questions about water.
Awesome. And Brenda?
Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Martin. I work at TriMet. I am a service planner, and I will be handling any of the bus reroutes during construction of this project.
Excellent. And Zach?
Hi, my name is Zach. I work with Jen at Lois D. Cohen Associates, and we're helping with public meetings and public involvement on this project.
Excellent. And then Chris.
Hi, everybody. Chris Lyons. I'm a resident of Multnomah neighborhood, and I'm the chair of the Multnomah Neighborhood Association's Southwest Capitol Highway Subcommittee. And over the past 5 years, I've been coordinating with roughly 200 local neighbors and interfacing with the city on all aspects of this project.
Excellent. Glad to have you here, Chris. And then I think we also have Clayton.
I'm sorry, did you just say my name?
I did, yeah, thank you.
Okay, I'm Clay Thompson. I do outreach for TriMet, and I'll be doing the outreach for TriMet on the detour for the line 44 and 64. Did you need more?
Okay. That's great. Yeah, just name, role in the project. And so as everyone can see, we have a great and really full team here representing a lot of different agencies and interests and a lot of different abilities to answer different questions. So now that you've met the team, we'll move into our presentation part of the evening. And so we'll get a little history in the project and an idea of exactly what our impacts are going to be. So I'll hand it back over to Steve.
And we want to, we have our guest of honor here, our contractor, Mike Landis is with us, and we are happy that he stayed after hours to join us on Zoom here tonight. So before I get into the presentation, I wanted to see, Mike, if you just wanted to say hi, and if you had any comments you wanted to say as we start construction here.
Hi, this is as he mentioned, I am Mike Landis from Landis and Landis Construction. We are a company here locally. It's my brother and I who own the company. We've been in business now since about 2000. We both grew up in Milwaukee area and live in Portland on and off, and I still live in Milwaukee. We love Portland and the community. We want to be a great contractor for you guys. I know this is going to be a long project. There's going to be fatigue. I want you, please have patience with us. We will work with you to have a successful project. I would ask for safety. Our crews, you're welcome to talk to our crews if you have questions when we get close to your house, but I ask you to make sure they see you, make eye contact. If you see any heavy equipment around, make sure they see you, because that is our #1 priority, is safety. I want our guys to go home. I want your families to go home and everyone be safe. Second of all, we care about how you feel and what's going on. We pride ourselves on being as clean as possible on this project, which will be interesting. It's going to be difficult. There's tight areas in there. We want to notify you guys, the area, let you guys know when we are coming. We will be starting on the 14th at Spring Garden, heading south on the widening and the impact on your property. Steve and everybody will tell you the schedule. There has to be a little bit of flexibility with us right now, as you've seen the climate with lumber prices and lumber and scarcity of products. We are running into some scarcity on some supplies for us, some supplies like for pipe, and which could change the schedule a little bit. I'm asking for patience during this time. If we say we're going to be somewhere and they're like, well, you're not here today, there is probably a reason for that. And I just ask you to come ask us. You will hear from me if you contact Landis and Landis. I will not push it aside. Our goal is to be back to you guys within 24 hours if there's a question. And I can tell you right now that everyone's asked me a question after the first handout. We were back to them with a phone call or an email within 2 hours. Now, is that going to happen every time? No, but we will be back to you. That's all I can say. I mean, we've done a lot of city projects with Portland. We just got done with one in your area. We did the sewer project on Hillsdale. right there, right above the village there. And we were there last year. I think that went well. You know who we are. We are going to be a good contractor for you guys. And please, when we get close to your area, if you have a question, is this tree coming down? Is this happening? Let us know. And we can guide it. So thank you very much. Once again, I'm Mike Landis from Landis Construction, and we're looking forward to a great project.
Appreciate that, Mike. Thanks for being here. Thanks for that statement. And I'll have a little bit later in the presentation, kind of a breakdown of how we'll do communications moving forward as we go through the project. But now I'll do a screen share and start this PowerPoint presentation. So give me just one moment here. And as always, I will ask my colleagues if this is showing up properly. I'm now going to hit the slideshow button. And are you seeing the full screen mode?
We are. Thanks, Steve.
Excellent. Okay, thanks everybody. So again, I'm Steve Sigathy, the project manager for the Portland Bureau of Transportation on the Capitol Highway project. Thank you all for tuning in tonight for this live Zoom open house. I'll start the presentation with just a little bit of background on the design features of the project, especially for those that might be new to the neighborhood or new to the project. And then we'll get specifically into the construction schedule and impacts. So as many of you know, this is a long history project. Advocacy for this project goes back 30 years and includes 3 different planning and project development efforts, including the 1996 Capitol Highway Plan, the 2011 Capitol Highway Plan Refinement Report, which dealt with specifically this part of Capitol Highway, and a 2016 Stormwater Corridor. We're talking about Capitol Highway between Garden Home and Taylor's Ferry roads and certain adjacent streets. This project, once we were able to have the funding come together, which really came together in May of 2016, when city voters approved the Fixing Our Streets 10-cent gas tax, and then later came together to even a greater degree with the contributions from the Bureau of Environmental Services, as well as a $2 million allocation from the 2017 state legislature. We were able to move forward with design engineering starting in 2016, 2017. And since then, we've been very fortunate to have, I'm sure many of you that are on the call tonight, taking part in the design process. We had the volunteer Capitol Highway Subcommittee led by Chris Lyons, who you saw just a few minutes ago. We've had, by my count, at least 8 subcommittee meetings, at least the ones that I was able to attend. We've had 3 open houses before the pandemic. We've had community walks. We had office hour sessions, more than 60 property owner consultations, right-of-way negotiations with property owners on 90 different easements or acquisitions, newsletters, e-bulletins, other advisory committees, including just last week or 2 weeks ago, visited with the Multnomah Village Business Association. And here we are on June 10th, 2021 for this open house. So the project scope, as you probably know, there are no sidewalks, bike lanes, or proper stormwater management facilities on this part of Capitol Highway. And this project aims to change that. So in particular, the transportation scope will feature a sidewalk and a protected bike lane on the east side of Capitol Highway from Brugger Street down here up to Garden Home Road. On the west side of Capitol Highway will be a multi-use path that will accommodate cyclists going southbound, which is generally uphill, and pedestrians on that side. So you have pedestrians on both sides, separated bike lane on the east, multi-use path on the west. 5 new pedestrian crossings at Brugger, Alice, Dolph, Carson, and Garden Home. 4 out of the 5 of those are paired with bus stops. We worked with TriMet to consolidate the bus stops at those locations. At the end of the project, we'll be completely repaving Capitol Highway from Collins Street, almost down here to Taylor's Ferry, all the way up to Garden Home. On Multnomah Boulevard, there will be a protected walkway, bikeway on both sides. This is sort of a paint and post treatment that'll provide a little bit safer, more safe space between 40th and 45th, which is next to the stormwater facilities we'll be putting in. And then in places on side streets where we needed to bury pipes, we took this opportunity to also do street surface improvements. So that means we'll be paving this gravel section of 42nd Avenue down here by Woods Natural Area, repaving a portion of Alice Street west of Capitol Highway, and repaving and putting a sidewalk on Dolph Court for 250 feet east of Capitol Highway. The environmental services scope or stormwater scope is very significant. The runoff that falls on this project area onto the street and sidewalks will be collected in inlets and go into a system of 7,000 linear feet of pipes leading to these 4 regional stormwater facilities. We also call those rain gardens. These are facilities that collect the water, filter it, clean the water, slow it down before entering the streams to improve water quality in the streams, including Tryon Creek, Vermont Creek, and Woods Creek. So 2 of these facilities will be on either side of Multnomah Boulevard near the post office. We call this one Multnomah North, next to the post office. Multnomah South, which is on the south side of the boulevard next to the village condos. The 42nd Woods Creek facility down here at the end of 42nd, which includes some stream restoration work and a new pedestrian bridge in Woods Memorial Natural Area on the trail, and the one on Dolph Court. And there's water system scope as well. The Portland Water Bureau has joined us on the project. Having the 3 bureaus work together on this project at the same time, it reduces disruption for the public. It's more efficient with your tax dollars and ratepayer dollars. And so they are going to be, or with our contractor, upgrading the water main on Capitol Highway from Marigold up to Garden Home, as well as 2 blocks of Carson Street and a little bit into Dolph and Lobelia as well. There's also some replacements and upgrades of fire hydrants and regulator vaults. And in addition to that, if you live along Capitol Highway, there will be some water meter adjustments that will need to take place. We will take care of those and we'll let you know in advance when those are happening. Project funding, this is a locally funded project, as in it's not a federal project. It's got 6.6 million from the Fixing Our Streets 10-cent city gas tax, almost 5 million in transportation system development charges that comes from development, and the 2 million in Oregon lottery funds. That was the legislative action from 2017. Thank you to those who advocated for that. BES, Bureau of Environmental Services, really stepping up to the plate with a $12 million contribution to the project, and Water Bureau as well, paying for the water main upgrades for a $27.5 million project budget, which covers not only our construction contract with Landis and Landis at 14 million, but also all the planning, project management, design engineering, right-of-way acquisition, construction management and inspection, public involvement, and some contingency funds. So we have a well-funded project. Now we'll get into why you're probably here, is to talk about construction. So this is just an overview slide here. You heard some of this earlier. This is an 18-month project. So that's starting next week and going through December of 2022. It's a big project. It's going to take a long time to build. It's not going to be constant activity in every place all the time. You'll see waves of activity move past your home if you live along here. Work hours for our contractor are going to be Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. They may not go to 6 p.m. every day, and some Fridays may be quieter. However, there may be some Saturday work for them to get this project done on schedule. We are looking at 6 nights of night work at the intersection of Multnomah and 40th. That's looking to be at the end of this July. And then there's the major southbound detour onto 45th, 48th Drive. I will get into all of these things in additional detail here in a minute. So the first work that you're going to see starting June 14th, this coming Monday, is they'll start clearing and grubbing and widening on the side of Capitol Highway, starting at Spring Garden Street and moving south towards Marigold. And Mike and his crew are focused on these areas. These are the areas where retaining walls need to be built. So they want to get a head start on those locations. So you'll see erosion control fencing. Some of the tree protection fencing is already there. I was out there today. That's installed on Garden Home Road now. Tree trimming. So some of the trees that are not being cut still need to have some of their branches trimmed so that the contractor can move their equipment around without hitting tree branches. There are a few remaining larger trees that do need to be cut. Most of the conflicting trees were actually removed in 2020. You probably saw that happen. That happened in April and September of last year. But there's just a handful of additional trees on private property that we had to wait until we had those permissions to cut. So that will happen as well. Then clearing and grubbing, which basically just means getting rid of ground cover vegetation, grinding roots and things like that. And then they'll widen out the side of the road with some excavation and rock. During this initial phase on Capitol Highway, two-way traffic will be maintained for these first few months. So the southbound detour will not start right away. The road will be pinched down, like for example, you see in this image, there's cones here where this crew was removing a tree. So you'll have flaggers at times. And so please look out for the flaggers and expect a little bit of delay during this initial 6 to 8 weeks on Capitol Highway, but two-way traffic will be maintained during that period. Also starting off in June here, they will be going down to the Multnomah South Stormwater Facility. That's the one on the south side of Multnomah Boulevard, sort of lined up with 42nd Avenue and west of the Village condos. Trees were cut there in 2020, so they have to go in and get rid of all the stumps and start excavating in there, get rid of all the other vegetation where the stormwater facility is going to go. That will involve building an access road from Garden Home. This is sort of a flag lot that goes back here, so they'll build a road back here to access the facility. If we need to work with the residents and the board of the Village condos, Mike Landis will be in contact with you. And then another significant batch of work that's going to get started on June 21st and will be pretty impactful here on the north end of the project is pipe work in Garden Home, 40th and Multnomah. So we're calling that the north end pipe work. And I have a few slides here that kind of show what that's going to look like from a sequencing perspective. And it'll look something like this. You know, they saw cut the pavement, dig a trench, install pipes. They'll have steel plates, you know, to cover the work when they open the road back up at the end of the workday. But when they're doing this, those portions of the road will be closed to through traffic. So for people that live along here, you're not going to be trapped in your home. They'll work with you to be able to get in and out of here. But through traffic will not be allowed. So even at the west end, it'll be kind of a dead end here if you're on this west side over here. But they'll start at 42nd Avenue and dig this pipe through here, moving east over to 40th Avenue. So this starts on June 21st and is a few weeks of work. Then as they move east, they'll get it through the Garden Home 40th intersection here. And that means that people on 40th here, it'll be another sort of local traffic only type of situation. Then they'll continue east for this segment between 40th and Capitol Highway, getting the pipe here. And again, this is the pipe work that's collecting all the runoff from Capitol Highway, and it's taking it down here and getting that water to these two stormwater facilities. So that's why we're doing pipe work in Garden Home Road, even though it's in some cases kind of far away from Capitol Highway. Then the pipe also goes down 40th and has to cross Multnomah Boulevard. So this is where we're looking at doing a few nights of night work. We're looking at 6 nights. We sent notices just earlier this week to a 2-block radius around here because we need to get a noise variance to be able to do that work. The 6 nights of work are looking to start around July 19th, subject to change, and they will most likely be non-consecutive. There might be 2 at a time, or a few days in between, because they got to cut the pavement and excavate, install pipe, backfill the trench, and repave. And they're also going to try and do some of the signal work here during that time period. So that was the north end pipe work again. So generally June 21st through July 30th, moving along Garden Home, 40th, and Multnomah. Once that work is done, there won't, while there will be quite a bit of work at these stormwater facilities, this in-roadway pipe work will be mostly done on that part of the project. Then in August, we move into the southbound detour. So let's talk a little bit about that. So this begins in August after the north end pipe work is complete. Whenever we do a major detour like this, it has to stay on collector roads. These are the more major roads that move through the area. So Garden Home, 45th, 48th, and Taylor's Ferry Road are all collector roadways. We're not allowed to, and we're not going to send any traffic down local streets, and we'll be keeping a lookout if we see people start using streets like Carson, for example, and they're not supposed to be doing that unless you live here. We'll be looking out for that, and feel free to send us notification if you're seeing some cut through traffic on side streets. But the reason we're doing this big detour is it really allows our contractor to more safely and more efficiently complete the project on Capitol Highway. It allows them to take that road down to 1 lane. They can move that lane around and safely do the work where they need to build retaining walls and sidewalks and bike lanes and install pipes. Without the detour, the project would probably take significantly longer. The detour does include TriMet buses, and I have a slide here where I will stop right after this and let Brenda and Clay say a word. But Capitol Highway will not be completely closed. It'll be open to northbound traffic throughout the duration of the project. So northbound cars, northbound TriMet buses, northbound bikes. We'll have a pedestrian route as well on Capitol Highway northbound. So I'm going to pause here and see if Brenda or Clay want to talk a little bit about the TriMet detours, which before the August detour, there'll be some impacts to the 45 in June and July, but then move on to the detour, the main detour in August. So Brenda or Clay?
Thank you, Steve. This is Clay Thompson. I appreciate your inviting us to this meeting. We've been working with PBOT for quite a while on this project, and it's been a long time coming. So we're anxious to get started with it and get through it just like you are. So if you take a look at the map on the right-hand side, you'll notice this is the map that we'll be putting into a postcard that will be mailed out to about a half-mile range around Capitol Highway. It'll reach all the way over to 45th Drive and beyond, and also in the eastbound direction as well, about a half-mile east of that Capitol Highway. So, and we'll also be mailing the postcard all the way south, almost to PCC Sylvania, and reaching out to PCC Sylvania directly. So they'll be getting a lot of information from us they can pass on to their students as well. So this route that we're looking at here, if you take a look in the upper right-hand corner of the map, it's a good place to start. What we have done here is, as Steve has mentioned, The line 44 and 64 both use Capitol Highway southbound and northbound. The 64 doesn't actually have, doesn't stop at most of the stops on Capitol Highway between Taylor's Ferry and Multnomah, but there are a few where they stop. They mostly stop right at the north and south ends of Capitol Highway, right at Multnomah and at Taylor's Ferry. So the line 44 does have stops all the way through there. And so on the map, you can see that the southbound stops, the circle with an X indicates southbound stops that will no longer be able to be served by the 44 in those areas because we're using Garden Home, 45th Drive, 48th, and then down to Taylor's Ferry. But in the northbound direction, you can see all the open circles that are there indicate stops in which you can board the line 44. You'll notice that it is only line 44 in that area. As I mentioned before, the 64 doesn't stop in that area currently, except the north and south end. So right now in that area, it's still just line 44 stops. And so this is the map that I mentioned that we're going to be attaching to the postcard that will describe the changes, the duration, which will start in August, is my understanding now. And then we will also be including a link, or not a link, but the URL for the project website, so that people can go there and get all the information about the project itself and how TriMet relates to it. And then also on this map, you can see some landmarks, obviously Gabriel Park there at the north end, and also I-5 down at the south end. So this is, as I mentioned, a map that we'll include in the postcard when we send it out to folks. And it will be, we usually land in mailboxes about a couple of weeks, week and a half to 2 weeks before the project starts, before we go on detour. So as I mentioned, we'll be going on detour sometime in August. We don't know the exact date yet, but when we do, the postcard will arrive approximately a week to a week and a half, or excuse me, a week and a half to 2 weeks in advance of our change in routes. So before this route actually does what it's showing here on the map, you'll get the postcard inviting people, letting people know, how to find information about it. And that's really about it. Brenda, do you have anything you wanted to add to this?
Sure, Clay, I do. I did want to, bring to light what Steve mentioned, which is that the line 45 on Garden Home will be impacted by the work that is being done this summer for the sewer work. We're not going to be doing a poster or postcards because the work is a much shorter duration. It's only 2.5 months, and the work is being done in stages, which only last a few weeks. So if you do ride the line 45, I would say make sure to check trimet.org before your trip this summer to just double check where your bus stop may be, since they'll be kind of moving around because of that work. And then the last thing I was going to mention is that we certainly acknowledge that there are fewer stops on 45th Drive in the reroute, and that's purely because there isn't a lot of through streets to Capitol Highway. So we did try to put them in locations that were safe near either crossings or good sight lines. So, we understand this is going to be a really long project, and we're hoping that the stops will be able to continue to serve your communities for the 18 months. If there are any concerns or questions, like Clay said, you will get a postcard with our information on it, so you can always contact us.
Thanks so much, Brenda and Clay. Thanks for being here tonight. And I guess one more item on transit is we're going to try our best to keep all of these northbound stops open. However, there will be probably some times, for example, if we're building a new concrete corner or something, that maybe one stop is closed and we send people down to the next stop or something like that. We're going to work with TriMet on that. But the intent is to keep all of the original stops that have existed on Capitol Highway for some time northbound, and keep those there, so that if, for example, if we have to close the stop on Marigold during construction, you could go down to Dolph, not too far. And we are required to keep a pedestrian route along Capitol Highway in some way, shape, or form. The way our project specifications say, it has to be and not a worse condition than what is there today. So right there today, as you know, is the gravel, the goat path, as people call it. So we need to have some sort of safe goat path or better along Capitol Highway. That means it might move to the west side of the road for a bit with those plastic channelizing devices, and maybe then it'll be over on the east side, but we'll get people through safely. And I saw that that was one of our first Q&A questions, so I wanted to get ahead of that one. Okay, moving on a little bit more about the detour. And that is mitigation. We've heard concerns about the detour for good reasons, and we want to let you know that we're taking some actions. So we took some preemptive actions in improving the crosswalks at 45th and Garden Home with some high visibility crosswalk markings, and kind of removing that sort of pork chop, we call it, island on the northeast corner of the intersection to make a safer walking space. We just finished putting in a new crosswalk at Carson Street and 45th, where one of the bus stops, the temporary bus stops, will go. We made sure our posted speed signage is clear. We were able to successfully reduce the speed limit on the northern and southern end of 45th, 48th down to 25 miles per hour. Speed limit changes currently in the state of Oregon are done by the Oregon Department of Transportation. We have to get permission from them in most cases. And they did not approve 25 in the Woods area, so that's currently posted 30, but we were able to get 25 down here near Taylor's Ferry and 25 near Garden Home. Those signs are up. And then in addition to that, and this is kind of brand new news, we had a request to look at doing a crossing at Marigold Trail, where there's a footpath down here from Marigold and 48th, and then it goes along the road for about 100 feet, and then the trail goes into the natural area again and pops out on Marigold. We are committing to doing a striped crosswalk with signs here at Marigold Trail to help out there. In addition, if we need to, we'll look at the signal timing at Taylor's Ferry and 48th. If we find that the detour is causing backups at the signal or something like that, or if there's something we need to do for the pedestrian call buttons or something like that, we can adjust the signal operations at that signal if we need to. So we'll take a look at that. And just generally speaking, we'll be monitoring this corridor. We'll have our construction managers and our inspectors out there, and we welcome hearing from you once this detour is in place. If you're seeing anything that you are finding unsafe, let us know. We understand 45th, 48th is not a great street for walking, and so we take this seriously. That will be a few more cars going through here in the southbound direction, and so we appreciate your patience on that. Moving through the rest of the construction schedule. So we took you through the north end pipe work, June, July, and then the start of the southbound detour. So once we have our detour underway, contractor will increase their work on Capitol Highway. So continued excavation and widening of the roadside, construction of the retaining walls, and they'll also still be down here at Multnomah South stormwater facility, building that, and doing down here at 42nd and Woods Creek, the in-water work. Some of the work in the stream corridor can only be done during the summer to protect fish. So they'll be working on that. So that's summer, sort of the second half of summer 2021, lots of action on Capitol Highway. Moving into the fall, again, still lots of action on Capitol Highway, continuing the retaining wall construction and grading some of the other areas along Capitol Highway, and working on all 4 stormwater facilities at this point: Multnomah North, Multnomah South, Dolph Court, and 42nd. This is a picture of a slightly different kind of retaining wall. But this is a cast in place retaining wall. You'll see forms go in, and it'll have a nice sort of faux rock feature. This was the type of retaining wall that people actually voted on in a visual preference survey during the design phase. So we'll be building those. As we get into the winter, with our wet winters, we can't move a lot of dirt or do a lot of paving during the winter. So that will be focused a lot on putting the pipes in the road. So the stormwater conveyance, the stormwater pipes that go in Capitol Highway for most of the length of the project will go in during this period. The new water main from Marigold up to Garden Home, the water main on Carson Street would go in during the winter and into the spring. So pipe work is something we often do then and will on this project. Then getting into the later spring and the summer and fall of 2022 will be all about providing the new sidewalks and bike lanes, a lot of concrete flat work. So that's the sidewalks and bike lanes on the east side, the multi-use path.
Okay, I just want to check in. From my screen, I see that Steve is experiencing some technical difficulties. Clay, I see your screen, your video is still on. Are you also experiencing the same issue?
I can still speak, so it doesn't sound like it. No, I am able to communicate. I can see the screen and everything.
Okay. Well, thank you all for your patience. I know that all of us who've had to do these online virtual meetings have experienced some level of technical difficulties. So we want to go ahead and give Steve the chance to come back on and to finish up his presentation, because I know he has a lot of great information. But I want to, next on our agenda, we're going to open it up to have Mike add any other comments about construction impacts. I know, Mike, you got the chance to speak at the beginning, so maybe you don't have any additional comments, but I want to just kind of open up this period if you had anything else you want to add about construction impacts.
If you want to give me one, am I muted?
Nope, I can hear you.
Okay. One thing I thought about, so just to let the residents know, when I leave a notification at your door, like I did last Friday, I'm the one that actually did it. Instead, we were starting on June 7th, and I got some calls of people really worried about that their car is going to be in the way and so forth. Usually you will have time, and sometimes I have to do like 2 blocks of notices at a time, and so you may be farther down the block than the where the actual project starts on the 7th. So when we go out on the 14th, we're going to be starting at Spring Garden, but I had to give notices all the way to Marigold. So I want people to realize there could be a little bit of a delay on when we're actually in front of your house. And if we're going to be blocking your driveway for a long period of time, you will have the opportunity to know. We will let you know that. I just want the neighbors, we will notice you, give you a good notice of time. And I know some of you may have like a car that doesn't start, or there could be a problem with, something's in the way, or a camper's there or something. You'll see us kind of coming down. The cavalry will be moving as we go, south in that area. You'll know, and give us an advance notice. If you have a special needs or something, grab one of our workers or try to ask one of our workers. They'll be respectful and ask them, hey, I have an appointment tomorrow at this time. Give us maybe 20 minutes to get out or something like that. That'll give my team a chance to know that, hey, there could be someone leaving here at a certain time. We want to help you guys. If you give us information, then it works both ways. So I just want you to know, and if you have any questions, go ahead, send me an email, call the office or the hotline number or my number, and we'll get back to you. And that's all I got to say. And I have to run to another appointment. I appreciate it. We love having the opportunity to work on this project. It's gonna be a great project. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. I'm so glad that you were able to join us this evening, and we really appreciate your input and your spirit of collaboration. I can really hear that you're ready to work with folks.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Take care.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Steve, I just want to check in with you, see if your connection is working, and if you want to sort of pick back up, or you feel like you were at a stopping point with the presentation.
Well, so I need to know when I cut out, because I actually have no idea when I cut out.
You were
Okay.
talking about.
Zach is telling me, here we go.
You were talking about summer, fall 22, the sidewalks, the bike lanes.
Okay.
Work on
All right,
Multnomah.
that's not too bad. Okay. So I was talking to myself in this room for everything after that. So I'll start right back then. And at that point, it's only about 6 more slides. So let me get this going again. Summer into fall of 2022.
Yes.
Yes.
That's even better. So we went through most of the project. All right, let me share screen again. Sorry about that, folks. You know, it is a challenge. I'm going to share screen again. Must have been my network. Okay, did that not work?
Oh, it didn't. It said you were sharing your screen, but we weren't able to see anything quite yet.
Yeah, and your face was frozen too.
Okay.
Steve, I can pull up the slides real quick.
I'm trying one more time here.
Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Okay. All right, I'll try and get this through quickly here. Maybe that's part of the issue, is just all the information going through the wires here. So basically wrapping up the project in fall of 2022 will be the tree and shrub planting. If you're following the project, you'll know that we didn't finish the landscaping plans with the rest of the plan set. We will be finishing the landscaping plans and sharing those out, particularly with residents, because shrubs along the back of the sidewalk. And overall, we're looking at 111 new trees on Capitol Highway, several hundred in the 4 stormwater areas, and some additional trees throughout the neighborhood. Again, the shrub reestablishment is something unique to this project. We understand a lot of people are losing privacy shrubs along Capitol Highway, so we'll be reestablishing those. Okay, so just a word on communications here as we move through the project. There are several ways you can reach out to us. To find general information, of course, you can go to the website. You can also go to the website to sign up for the e-bulletin list. You can get your email address on there. We're going to be sending out construction updates roughly every 2 weeks during the busiest parts of construction. If you want to reach out by email with a question or concern, please use this project email, capitalhighway@portlandoregon.gov. This is the best way to email us because it goes to multiple staff, including myself, and it goes to Jen and several other project staff, so we can better serve you if one of us is out or if one of us has a better answer to your question. Similarly, if you want to call, the best way to call is to call the hotline 503-823.
But it looks like on my screen, we have a frozen Steve again. Is that the case for you?
Yep, he's frozen.
Okay, So let me just pick up where Steve left off, which is that our hotline is 503-823-2516. And again, like Steve mentioned, that we'll go to a number of different employees so that we can make sure that we get questions answered. So let me go ahead and move on to the next portion of our agenda is really our question and answer. But I know Steve is always going to be our best person for answering questions because he has been on this project forever and is just really a wealth of information. So I'm sorry that we're having these technical difficulties and that he won't be there to direct traffic, but the good news is we have so many great city agencies represented tonight, and I think that we'll really be able to direct some of the questions to these folks to be able to answer. And if not, then we'll make sure that we capture these questions and then we come back to everybody here today to make sure that we get some answers to you folks. And so, Dan, I wonder if you might be able to sort of step in for Steve. You, I know, are the construction manager, and it's not quite the same role, but I may ask if you can sort of help me direct some traffic as well, since you have a comprehensive look at the project.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay, well then I'm just going to go ahead and move into our first question. Oh, I see Steve has rejoined us. So maybe before I start the Q&A, Steve, do you want to check in and make any sort of transitional remarks?
He's frozen again.
Oh, well, at least you can see, folks, he's really trying. He's trying to be here with us. But thank you, Dan, for sort of stepping into this role. Well, then I'll go ahead and start with our first question. And our first question starts with the comment that there are frequent walkers on Capitol Highway, and that's something that we've heard a lot. And so what kind of disruptions should we expect to the existing goat paths and the shoulders? Do you anticipate a complete closure of those paths?
So for the most part, I think we're expecting that either one side or the other of the street will be accessible for some sort of pedestrian traffic. Obviously, when they're in the spot working and digging out for the retaining walls or whatever, that side of the road will be closed. But we're expecting that the other side should have some availability for walking. So you might just have to scooch across the road and work your way around the small construction area for this first few months.
Great. And then our next question, it looks like part of their question was addressed when Mike spoke, but just asking why we're starting at Southwest Spring Garden rather than Southwest Garden Home Road.
Right, and Mike did mention that. So we do have temporary easements for the retaining walls that expire, I think for the most part in January. So north of Spring Garden, there aren't any of those retaining walls. So we're starting at Spring Garden, moving south to try to get all of those retaining walls in before those temporary easements expire. So we're hitting places where we'll run out of time potentially.
Great, thank you, Dan. And I just want to do a quick check in with Steve if you're able to respond by audio if your visual is not functioning.
Yes, I can hear everybody, and so what I'll do is I'll just keep my my camera off, and I checked with the other members of my household to make sure they weren't taking up too much bandwidth.
It's always my problem too. My kids are playing on the Switch. It looks like our next question is a general question, just if the public has a list of the people who are working on the project, like an agency and position list.
We can provide that. Yeah, we can. I would, if you don't mind, whoever that was, if you don't mind emailing the Capitol Highway at portlandoregon.gov, and we can get you our full roster.
Great. The next question that we have, the person posting the question is concerned about the detour on Southwest 45th and 48th because there are so many blind turns, and this person feels that there's already a dangerous pedestrian crossing. And wondering what's the plan to monitor and remediate that plan for the next 18 months. So how are you addressing that traffic safety within that corridor?
I'll start with a few comments and then see if Wendy wants to contribute anything here. I mean, some of the proactive measures that we did even before the project were requesting the lower speed limit and then putting in the additional pedestrian crossing at Carson. And now we're going to put one in at Marigold Trail. You know, it's also going to be not only a proactive, but also making sure we are just watching that road every day. I mean, we're going to have project staff out there. We'll have our contractor in other areas nearby, but just making sure we are seeing how the detour affects that road when it gets underway,
Yeah, I can,
and seeing if we need to do any additional measure.
Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, that was all I had. I'm sorry if I cut out again, but
Yeah, I don't have much to add. It is a monitoring process when we do detours like this to just make sure that all the signage stays in place and is visible, and we are monitoring and making sure that things are going okay there. We anticipate being able to get the crosswalk in Marigold in before the detour starts. I did place a request for traffic enforcement on 45th in this a little bit later, as we expect the detour to come online. You probably all know and understand that police services are hard to come by these days for traffic enforcement. They've been redirected to work on other things, and there's just other issues that are happening in the city. So there's no guarantee that they will come out because we send them requests for various streets. But we did put in that request, and there is a chance and a hope that they would come out and provide some presence at the beginning of the detour.
Great, thank you so much, Wendy. It looks like our next question asks, at the intersection of Garden Home and Capitol, there's a seemingly abandoned Handy Andy's gas station. Will this property be changed in any way?
property itself, this is Steve, the property itself will not be changed by the city anyway, but we will be putting in sidewalk along the frontage. So there'll be concrete sidewalk. That will also be where the southbound multi-use path begins. So the bikes will ramp up onto the multi-use path, and the multi-use path made of concrete will start there. So we'll just kind of be cutting into the pavement there and installing a path, but otherwise the property itself will remain as it is. Hopefully there will be some private activity there. I don't know of anything. Perhaps folks in the neighborhood know, but I don't know.
Great. Okay, our next couple of questions are again about traffic safety. The first question refers specifically to the north end pipe work, which is scheduled June 21st through August 15th. Is there more than trench and lay new stormwater pipe for this work? Will there be any additional sanitary sewer work or water main work or other utility work?
This might actually be a good opportunity for one of the BES team members. I believe the main short answer is no, but I want to see if they have some details they'd like to share about that work. Either Lisa or we can start with Lisa or go to Anna.
Yeah, I think the short answer is right. It's no. We're mostly just doing a new stormwater pipe there. There is some work on, I think mostly it's on Capitol Highway where it's kind of in the way and we have to move it. But there's not any new sanitary pipe that's going to be put in Garden Home.
Okay, great. Any other team members that want to weigh in on that question? Okay, great. Then we'll move on. The next question is in the context of the Garden Home Road detour. And the question is really referring to traffic and speed control on westbound Garden Home Road from Southwest 40th to Southwest 45th. This poster says that speed is already a problem and suggests the following options. And I'm curious if our team can sort of respond to these ideas. One is a photo radar, speed bumps, bump pouts at 41st, Southwest 41st Avenue, and then other ideas for dealing with the speed issues on that road. So I'm curious if you all could reflect on those options.
Oh, I think I'd like to ask Wendy here. I mean, some of the more permanent solutions, we don't have an identified funding source for example, bump outs or curb extensions. There's a curbless street, so we'd have to figure out how that would work. Speed bumps, I think we would probably shy away from speed bumps because it's on a bus route and some level of emergency response route, just like Capitol Highway is. But we do have speed reader boards around the city that we, potentially, if we see a need as this happens, that we can redeploy potentially. Wendy, do you want to have anything to add before I get too off track on that?
You're not off track at all. Yeah, the bump outs are difficult, because as you mentioned, there aren't any curbs. It is a secondary emergency response route, so there is potential for speed bumps, but when we were scoping this project, we didn't have additional funding to include that as a mitigation measure. It's not to say we couldn't come back and do that, but to do that during construction would be difficult. We do have the speed reader boards. They're solar, and it's considered a mobile program where we move them from various streets like every 3 to 6 months. So Steve and I had talked about that, and we were going to see if there were any available, because we have a limited number that are spread across the city. But that could be a tool that we could employ on either Garden Home or 45th or 48th if we see that there are issues. And we can also go out during the project and take volume counts and speed counts. We can either do that through rubber hoses or have somebody out with a radar gun tracking speeds. So that would be part of our monitoring process.
Thank you, Wendy.
Great. And our next question is, what, if anything, can make any new speed control permanent?
Well, we hadn't thought of permanent speed reader boards if we're talking about that type of treatment. One thing I do like to share, though, and we've seen this on Multnomah Boulevard to some extent, is on Capitol Highway. Right now, there's no curbs. When you introduce the curbs, it sort of creates this friction effect where people, some people, will often drive slower because you see the vertical curbs, you'll see the street trees, you'll see the new bike lanes and sidewalks that kind of will give the corridor a calmer feel and will naturally calm speeds on Capitol Highway. Of course, that's not going to prevent all sorts of devious driving behavior, but we have seen that on streets where we introduce curbs where it used to be previously a wide open environment. But yeah, permanent speed control, if we're talking about like reader boards, I don't think we would have plans to do that. I did see we are getting, we got more legislative support to add additional speed safety cameras. This is a high crash corridor and it potentially could be eligible for that, but I don't know if this would be as high on the list. Wendy, do you have any thoughts about that?
We have to do a Because in the legislation, it talks about the rate of crashes has to be 25% higher than the citywide rate. And so while this is identified as a high crash on the high crash network, we have not done the calculation to see if it meets this 25% over value. So we'd have to check that. But yeah, we were just talking about that today, about how and what we might roll out. It would be more speed cameras, and some other treatments, some left turn calming treatments, which are rubber speed bumps that help with left turns. So that would kind of be a bookending at each end of the project. But yeah, that's a little bit undefined at the moment. So we don't know where exactly it'll go and how far the money will stretch at this point.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, our next question, when you addressed this question a little bit in your previous comments, but this poster asks 45th/48th also does not contain sidewalks, bike lanes, or safe walking paths. What specifically will be provided along 45th/48th to allow for a safe pedestrian bike experience given the increased traffic for so long? Right,
and the project won't be providing any significant facilities alongside of 45th, 48th. It's just not within the budget of the project to do a huge amount of improvement of the detour routes. And we understand it's just not a good street for walking. We totally get that, but it just isn't within the scope to do that. That said, during the presentation, we are committed to doing that Marigold Trail crossing, and that does involve the concept that Wendy had put together is, that trail has sort of an offset crossing where you have to walk along the west side of the road for 100 or so feet, and we could put in a brief little stretch of traffic separator to keep pedestrians safer during that transition of the trail crossing before you cross the street. Other than that, it's getting safer crossings of the street so that people can, I know there's not a lot of parallel routes. I mean, you have your Southwest Trail number 7 that goes through the natural area, and but yeah, we're committed to the additional safe crosswalks on 45th, and monitoring and reacting to any unforeseen conditions that happen when the detour is in place.
Great. Our next question is asking to explain a little bit more about the stormwater work that will be happening on Carson and 37th.
And I know that is a separate project by the Bureau of Environmental Services, working to improve that stream on Carson. So I'll have Lisa just popped up. I'll see if she can cover that one.
Yeah, and I can just talk a little bit about it. And we do have on our website, you can go to our website and there's a bit more, and our public involvement person is Joe Tercy, and you can sign up for email updates on that. But we are, and I was actually just talking with the construction manager yesterday, and I think the work's moving along pretty quickly there. And so there's a new storm pipe that that's getting put in between 39th and 37th that used to not be any sort of storm pipe. All of the stormwater used to come down that steep street and go into the sanitary manhole, and also flood some of the adjacent properties. So we're putting in a new storm pipe to 37th and then replacing that storm pipe to 35th, putting in a new stormwater swale and then repaving that street, just because it's doing this stormwater pipe work. We kind of required us to repave it. So that's that work. I'm not exactly sure how far along, other than I did hear all the stormwater pipe work got put in, and they just need to do the swale and the paving work. But you can go to the website. Yeah, I guess I'll just pretty much leave it at that. But it is a separate, it's a separate basin from the Southwest Capitol Highway project. So Southwest Capitol Highway drains to we call like Basin 3, and that goes into Tryon headwaters as well as Carson Basin. So those two kind of merge together over on 35th and it's that side street, but over on 35th, they come together and then they go into Tryon Creek.
And so that project does have traffic impacts usually during, I think it's mainly just during the workday on 39th and 37th. And so, there could be a few months of overlap where they're doing work during the day on 39th or 37th while we have a northbound only on Capitol Highway. And I suppose that could, for a very localized area, have some circulation challenges, but everybody will be able to access their property. And if anything, it could cut down on, cut through in that area. And I think, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, when I look on the website for that one, I think that finishes by the end of the calendar year.
Yeah, it's a much shorter project, and I think it's moving along even faster than they had initially planned. So it's a contractor that we've worked with a lot before, and they're just kind of moving along pretty quickly. So I don't even think it'll go into the end of the year.
Great.
Great. So moving on to our next question. Steve, this one's a 3-part question. And so I'm going to go ahead and read the different parts and then you can sort of address them together or separate them out. But this questioner wants to ask, they actually own a property that may be affected by this construction. They have a retaining wall and want to know how are they going to know from Landis and Landis exactly how much room that they're going to need? What will that communication look like? And the second part of their question is if there's an estimate for the amount of time that the water might be shut off when the time comes, and how they're going to receive that advance notice. And then the third part of their question is again asking this question about how to address safety concerns regarding an increase in traffic on 45th.
Oh, and thank you, Trevor, for that question. And I've had the opportunity to meet Trevor out in the field on occasion during the design phase. And if I remember correctly, there's not an easement on that property, so it's not easy to see the exact extent of work. And that may be true on several properties where we didn't need an easement, temporary construction easement, because we had enough right of way. And in those cases, what you'll probably see, and Dan might be able to correct me here, but what you would see is you would see surveyors come in there a few weeks before work started and kind of put in some stakes that would show where the limit of work is.
Absolutely. What they'll probably come in and do is define where the property line is, and if we don't have an easement, the contractor should not cross that line as they're doing any of their work. So that's what you'll see if we don't have a easement with your property right now.
And there very well could be erosion control fencing in there too. So, you would only see the work on the other side of the fence. Water shutoffs, I want to see if Katie could talk about a typical situation for when we need to, for example, replace a water service line, what that looks like and how long that takes.
Sure, here I am. So when we do our water work, we typically try to keep people plugged into the water system for as long as we can. So while we're putting in a new pipe and making connections from the new pipe to people's water meters, we'll try to keep people's water flowing through the old pipe the whole time, just so that you have as little disruption as you can to your water. And then when the disruption comes, so where we talk about the water shutoff is when we have to switch from the pipe that's currently serving water to you to the new pipe. So when that happens, we typically have our crews come out, Water Bureau crews come out, and they will hang door hangers that explain this is the day we think there's going to be a water shut off. This is the time of day we expect it to happen. And this is what you can expect when that happens. And here's what you should know about how to plan ahead. And so when we do that, usually the water shutoffs are for a, on a regular water main project, it would probably be for just one day. And it's usually not all day. We'll tell you it's from 8 to 5, but our crews really pride themselves on trying to do things more quickly. So they'll try to, disrupt your water for as little as possible. But we do always give advance notice, at least 24 hours, usually a lot longer, further ahead notice, that it's coming. So people can plan ahead, have a pitcher of water set aside, or, fill up a bowl, or, do whatever they want to do, take their shower the night before, just so that they can be ready for what's coming. But that's a sort of typical water shut off. When we say intermittent water, utility disruption, it's not like we're gonna shut you out of water for days. It's more like there's gonna be a day, and water, people use water from the morning, the moment they make coffee in the morning till, before they go to bed at night. So we understand it's a really essential service. And so we try to make that as least disruptive as possible. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks so much, Katie. And then, on the 45th, just kind of reiterating some of the past commitments to, making those additional crossings safer, and just keeping a really consistent eye on that road throughout the course of the detour.
Great. It looks like our next question, we have a question again that sort of asks about the impact to traffic on the detour. And so I'm going to go ahead, since we talked about that question, I'll go ahead and move through those questions, but indicate just to elevate that those are concerns that the community has. Our next actual question is, after Garden Home Road trench and pipe work is done, will the Garden Home Road be repaved? And then this poster notes that it's really deteriorating right now, and that they're also seeing some pooling of water.
Yes, this is a great one, and this is actually a question I had asked one of our pavement supervisors at PBOT, and the very unsatisfying answer is that it depends. What often happens is we go out and, when they saw cut the pavement to put in the pipe, and then you have machinery go over it, and we see what the condition of the road is. And when we're ready to re-establish pavement, there may be some places where the road is in good enough shape, and we just patch the trench with final pavement restoration. There may be other times where it's going through a really bad area of pavement, and we actually expand the area where the pavement gets restored. And in some places, if it gets really bad, we actually do go that full width of the pavement. It's just hard to know right now to what extent we would repair the pavement. It often is a call that is made in the field during construction. So that might not be a satisfying answer, but that's often how it goes during a project like this. Does any of the other team have any comments about that?
No, that sounds right, Steve. It all depends how we find the condition of the street. And our contractor's very careful with their excavation and their equipment. So it all depends.
Yeah.
Great. Our next question states that ODOT will be paving the I-5 southbound on-ramp to Capitol Highway sometime before September. The poster says that they anticipate the ramp will be closed for 2 weeks. Is Capitol Highway Project Group coordinating with ODOT? And if so, what's that traffic flow going to look like at that complicated intersection?
Yes, we are coordinating with ODOT. I'm setting up a meeting with Nate Scott, the project manager there, to talk about that coordination further. One of the ideas that led us to doing the northbound detour is, the southbound detour and keeping northbound traffic open on Capitol Highway was to try and not make any congestion at the crossroads area worse. So, if we had done it the other way around and people were trying to get off at the exit, the off ramp of I-5 and get onto Capitol Highway northbound, and then they find that they couldn't do it, and we potentially get back up on the freeway. We wanted to avoid that. But beyond that, it's just coordinating with the Crossroads project team, and we are doing that. And our goal will be to minimize disruption that could happen if we didn't coordinate properly.
Great. And then the next two, we have two comments that both sort of address the same issue, that the crosswalk at Brugger and Southwest 45th/48th seems to be a dangerous place. And I'm curious if there's any other mitigation that we might do in that area.
We did look, and specifically Wendy, our city traffic engineer, looked at 48th and Brugger, and I think because of those sight lines, we didn't feel that without doing a heavier amount of investment at that crossing, that we couldn't just put some paint down, that we would need to do even more there. And so as part of the project, we don't plan on doing a formal crossing there, because it would take a lot more to make it right. Wendy, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, that's right, Steve. Yeah, there is southbound traffic. It is hard to see them coming when you're on the north side of the intersection. And so to make that a safe crossing, we would want some sort of active warning, a flashing light that's actuated by pedestrians crossing. And it's just not something that this project can afford at this time. We hadn't budgeted for it from the beginning. So it is still a legal crossing, even with or without a marked crosswalk. But yeah, it would take a higher level to mark a crosswalk there.
Great. So our next, we have about 3 different questions that are sort of all asking the question about, now that you have a 25-mile-an-hour speed limit, what are the possibilities for enforcing that? And one suggestion is creating bigger signs. But I'm curious if we can kind of readdress that question of how to enforce these speed limits.
Well, and it's, as Wendy indicated, the police resources for enforcement by traffic officers is limited, and that's an issue that's bigger than us, bigger than the people that are here today. So we really are having to rely on design when it comes to the roads that we actually are building improvements on. And so that's why we're committing to some of these crosswalks where we did lower the speed limit there. I see there is a question about making the signs more clear. And we did check that out as recently as today, and I think the signage is clear. We have the 25 zones at the south end and at the north end, and then in between it's at 30. And those, we had new signs put in when we got that approved. So those signs will probably be the ones that remain there. If we see like tree branches starting to grow over those, we can get crews out to trim branches. But yeah, the enforcement topic is definitely challenging. We are, Wendy did mention earlier that we'll, if there's an opportunity to redeploy one of the portable speed reader boards, while that may not technically be an enforcement mechanism, it is a reinforcement, I guess, mechanism that we can look at deploying in the area.
Great. One question I know you have already touched on, but again, this issue of the increased traffic on 45th, 48th. The question asks if there's any plan to extend the sidewalk or create an additional walking path down the west side of 48th by Taylor's Ferry.
Yeah, and this brings up a great larger topic, which is that when this project is done, the work in Southwest Portland that needs to happen will be far from complete. We have a lot more work to do in Southwest Portland. We recently did a strategy called Southwest in Motion that many of you may know about. You can Google PBOT Southwest in Motion, and there's a plan that has some different improvements, particularly some lower cost improvements that can be done, like shoulder widening and things like that. I'd have to check to see what there is on that plan regarding 48th. I don't know if Wendy or anybody else remembers. I know there is, and many of the, and another important point about Southwest in Motion is not all of those projects have funding, but that really starts the process of listing what the priorities are moving into the future. And then, you know, we as staff can start going after grant money. We can start, if the voters approve, you know, the next round of fixing our streets in 2024, look at other projects in Southwest Portland. And, you know, I think the best way to advocate for those is, you know, get involved in your Southwest neighborhoods transportation committee. You can call our 503-823-SAFE and talk about a new project that you want to see. You can reach out to project staff. We can connect you with our planners. But that's a good point. The short answer is no, we don't have plans to extend the sidewalk on the west side of 48th by Taylor's Ferry, but we need to get into some more project development throughout Southwest.
Great, Stephen. I think that may touch on our next question, which is about the Multnomah Village Business Open signage location. This poster suggests a couple different locations, but I wondered if maybe you could just speak more generally to how we'll signal to folks that the Multnomah Village is still open during this construction.
That's a great question. You know, fortunately, this project will not have nearly the amount of impact that the paving project that finished in 2020 did. That project that paved the heart of the village on Capitol Highway from 35th up to Texas. That said, we want to keep, we want to remain in good standing and support our businesses that are part of the Multnomah Village area and the business association. So we have, I believe, a few of those signs that we can get. So I'm going to be in contact with Jill and Peter and some of the other, and question was from Randy, who's also on the business association. So we can work with you guys in the MVBA to get some business signage open and figure out if we want to put that, you know, in the project area, like just south of the village or something like that. We can definitely connect about that.
Great. And I just want to elevate, we have two other questions that really address the issue of speeding and speed enforcement on 45th. But one person asked a more general question, which is just if you can explain local traffic that uses Southwest Capitol Highway. For example, this person lives on Capitol Highway.
Right, so during the detour, northbound traffic will be open at all times. So, and then in addition to that, we need to provide access to everybody's property throughout the project. Now, the one exception to that will be many of the driveway connections are going to get reconstructed to connect into the roadway and get through the sidewalk and bike lane areas. So there will be times when you'll have a few days and you'll get a notice from the contractor, from Mike Landis and his crew, and it'll say, hey, we're gonna reconstruct your driveway next week. And then, you know, you can call him and figure out what do you do with your cars, you know, other access issues that you may be concerned about. But, you know, other than that, we're going to keep property access throughout the project, and we're going to keep northbound traffic. And you know, it will in some cases cause some challenges if you're wanting to go south, and you know, if you're trying to get down to like PCC, and you know, the official detour, of course, is you go north on Capitol Highway and go down Garden Home and 45th. We do know that, you know, people that live in the neighborhood are going to use some of the local streets to get where they're going, especially if they live in the neighborhood. That said, if we see too many people, or if you see too many people using a local street during the detour, let us know. And, you know, we can take some measures if we're seeing too much cut through. That was kind of a long answer, but.
That's great. Our next question is referring to Mike Landis. Mike mentioned that the rising cost of materials and possible supply shortages are an issue. And this poster asks, is there enough money in the contingency to cover potential supply cost spikes or overages? Or has the contingency fund been recently evaluated against current conditions?
Yes, it has. We were in a, when this project went out to bid, we were in a pretty competitive bid environment. So we are, I think we're getting a really good value from Landis and Landis, and that allowed us to have a healthy contingency fund.
Great, Dan, did you want to add a comment to that as well?
Yeah, so technically, since this is a low bid contract, the cost to the city for the work that's on the plans and specs is locked in at this point. So there should not be any cost escalation for those materials. There are two items that are escalatable in the contract, and one is fuel and the other is asphalt. So if those prices go crazy, say a gallon of diesel fuel goes to $10 a gallon, there is some compensation back for the contractor. But other than that, everything should be locked in. The things that we might see is that we're already seeing shortages of pipe and some other materials. So we're having to change the material types to meet the contract specs. So, and like you said, that might slow us down or cause us to shift to a different location on a particular day or week. So that's the short answer.
Great, thank you, Dan. We had one other question, again, asking about the speed patrols on 45th. I'm sort of worried about that detour. But our next question that we haven't heard about is if there's a plan for road and driveway aprons. And then this person notes that they're already quite steep.
I'm going to take a risk here and turn on my camera. If that goes wrong, I'll turn it back off again. Yes, every driveway on Capitol Highway had civil engineers design the driveway connection in a proper way. So it'll have the apron, that's sort of the triangular shaped connection to the sidewalk on either side of the driveway. And we had to make sure that the transitions between the different panels of the sidewalk and the driveway weren't too steep so that a car won't bottom out or either underneath or at the front bumper. So we looked at all those are all to our standards. And yes, there are some really steep driveways. There's a handful of really steep driveways that were challenging to design, but we were able to do it. And oftentimes what that means is that the driveway connection goes pretty far back onto your property, and we got an easement to make that connection. So like some of the driveways go back like 20, 25 feet to reconnect them properly. Some of them are shorter.
Great. So we had another comment about that intersection at Brugger being really difficult for people to cross. But our next question is, will the construction staff be parking on neighborhood streets?
Dan, do you want to answer that one?
Sure, I'll take a shot at that one. We haven't talked about that specifically with the contractor, but typically what will happen is they do have what we call a staging area at the armory, the Sears Armory down on Multnomah, where they have already fenced in an area. Well, they'll be storing materials, and they have a little office shack set up there. Typically, the workers will show up at that place, and then they'll all get, they'll load into a crew truck and all drive to the work site for that day all together to try to limit the number of vehicles. And usually those trucks will be then located within that worked zone, so trying not to spill out into the neighborhood. We will bring that up at our next construction meeting to make sure that they will follow that procedure. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, great. That's a great question. We have a couple of comments again about the issue of speed enforcement on 45th. Again, some suggestions about photo enforcement or radar enforcement. And some enthusiastic comments about folks who are excited to see this project in fruition. One question that we got, and I know Katie, you addressed this a little bit, is the question of which homeowners' utilities will be temporarily impacted during the project. All of them, or will it just be water? And what do you mean by temporary?
Right, and I'm going to look to BES staff here. I don't think there were a lot of, for example, sanitary sewer connections that were impacted by this. There may be a small handful. I don't know if Anna or
Yeah, I don't think we
Lisa.
had that many.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's mainly just water, and it's not every property, and in most cases it's not having to like redo the whole water service line. It's mainly just adjusting the meters. I mean, right now the water meters are kind of floating out there in the shoulder, and then when we do the project, they have to be put in the right place in between the road and the sidewalk. So some of them have to be adjusted up and down. Some of them have to be moved, left to right, usually both. Those are the main impacts. And I think Katie did a good description of what that process is like. There may be one or two sanitary laterals that we need to look at, but I think those are very few. And by the way, that's just me remembering them. They are well documented in the plans, and we can look at that. And if you have a specific property, we can definitely get that answer to you very shortly.
Yeah, just real quickly, Katie, did you want to add anything to that? Or
I guess, I mean, the one thing I would mention is that, when we replace the water main on the northern part of the project, people will feel that impact in terms of when we turn the water on and off to switch over the mains. But then again, if we're south of that area where we're doing the water main, when we move people's water meters out of the way of the new sidewalks, the new stormwater improvements, we'll have to turn the water on and off when we switch over those new water meters. But that, again, like with all of our work, we always give advance notice so people can plan ahead.
great. Another question that we had was again about that gas station handy Annie as a problem, possible leak into the water system. And the question is if there is a way for the city to buy that property or have a use or something. And I know, Steve, you kind of addressed that, but I wonder if you want to touch again on the issue of that property.
I guess the only thing I'll add is that we did soil testing there in the areas that are going to be disturbed for the stormwater pipe and the sidewalk, and we are going to properly dispose of any contaminated media that we find. We did find some there that I believe was related to the gas station, and we're going to dispose of those safely under regulations, environmental regulations. But yeah, beyond that, we don't have any plans for that property. It would remain in private hands. I know there's been a for sale sign or a for lease sign up there for over a year now. That's all I know.
Great. And we had one suggestion that the city use it as a parking facility, just as a suggestion. It looks like we had a couple more commenters who wanted to point out of how they view that Brugger and 45th intersection as dangerous. And one poster mentioned that it's been identified by Safe Routes to Schools as a dangerous crossing, and added that they would really like to see a crosswalk there. We had a couple more comments again about the issue of speed down Garden Home Road. And again, a request for folks to be sure that they're looking at that and making sure that we're doing all the mitigation to that speed issue that we can. The next question we have is, will Marigold crossing have any warning lights. And the poster notes that it's already dangerous without them, given the 2 curves and the speeders.
Yeah, no, the crossing that we, this is the new crossing that we're talking about putting in on 45th Drive, would not have flashing lights. But when Wendy, our city traffic engineer, was out there, she found that there was adequate sight distance to put in a painted or marked crosswalk with signs. Even though there is a curve there, there's just enough sight distance to put that in. But no, we're not able to put in the flashing beacon there at this time anyway.
Okay, great. I just want to note we have one other comment that is again in support of having some sort of flashing cross light at that intersection. The next question we have though is what is the status on changing the crossroads interchange for left turn to I-5 on-ramp and other traffic redirection around Barber Food?
Yes, so that project, which is led by the Oregon Department of Transportation, is still in moving forward. And I mentioned I'll be meeting with that project team here in the next few weeks. My understanding is that they're almost ready to go out to bid for construction later this summer. So we're going to be working with them closely. But yes, that project is still happening. It proposes it will be, as you said, eliminating the northbound left turn from Capitol Highway northbound onto the I-5 southbound ramp. And we are partnering with them on that project by putting in a proper concrete sidewalk on the east side of Capitol Highway in front of World Foods and the liquor store and that other property, and working to get bike connection through there by putting in a shared multi-use sort of repurposing of the sidewalks on both sides of Capitol Highway there. So yeah, that is still happening, and I would recommend reaching out to that project team, and I'll see if I'll get better information on that, and maybe I can provide a cross link on the website or something like that.
Yeah, great. It's great to have these questions about adjacent projects so that we can be really clear about what part is Southwest Capitol Highway and how we can direct questions to relevant other project leaders. So thank you for those questions. The next question we have is, when will the access road from Garden Home Road to the Multnomah South facility be built?
Okay, I think I'm going to lean on Dan for this one. It is in the next few months.
Yes, yeah. So in the short term, I don't think they're going to do any heavy reconstruction of that access way. They're going to be just accessing it with as it is, with the construction equipment to get in and do the clearing and rough grading of that area. I think the concrete pieces that they need to kind of build the retaining walls and the road down there will be probably, I think that those pieces get delivered in November. So it'll be November to December, and then that whole the whole formal driveway will be put in at that point.
But people will see, before that happens though, as you said, you'll have excavators and stuff going through that little connection there pretty soon, like in the next few weeks.
Yeah, probably in a month or two. Yeah.
Okay, the next, we've got 2 additional comments of folks who note that, again, that crossing at 45th and Brugger is really dangerous and that they're concerned about it. One comment offers a suggestion that folks carry flags on both sides of the streets to try and indicate that they're crossing. And then another just asks if there's anything further that the community can do to advocate for more safety precautions around that crossing.
Yeah, for that, I would definitely, as your first stop, leave a message at 503-823-SAFE. And that's a message line that's sort of an input for all safety concerns. And then we, that gets directed to staff as appropriate. I believe the email version of that, correct me, PBOT colleagues, if I'm wrong, but safe@portlandoregon.gov. Did I get that right, Wendy?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so, that would be a way of, we start getting a bunch of email and calls about 45th and Brugger, we can look into future project opportunities on that. But we determined at this point that it wouldn't be part of the capital highway project, but that doesn't rule out taking a look at it for a future opportunity.
Yeah, and I would just add that our PED PDX program or document talks about priorities and funding priorities within the city of Portland. I am not sure where this lands within that document. If we're currently looking for funding for tiers 1 through 3. So if that lands in those top 3 tiers, then it would be a project that we would consider funding sooner rather than later. So you can look up PED, PED, PDX, and it should take you to the website. And there's an interactive map where you can see where crossing gaps are prioritized, and also sidewalk connections where they're prioritized. So that may be helpful to some of you who are looking to see how you might advocate for funding or future improvements.
Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Wendy. It looks like we have one other comment that says police aren't the issue to speeding, and argues that the proper width for speed is a better way to sort of mitigate the speeding issue. And then the next question we have is, can the detour be just Barber?
Well, the official detour for people that are coming out of Multnomah Village southbound on Capitol will be this 45th, 48th. But I was talking to Jeremy, our main project traffic engineer assigned to the project, and one thing we were talking about is we expect that as you get further into the detour time-wise, that people are going to kind of adjust to different ways of getting around Southwest Portland. Some people might not go down Capitol Highway to get to PCC. Maybe they're coming from Northeast Portland, and then instead they're gonna, well, I suppose they would go down I-5 anyway, but the idea being that after a few months, people start to get the hang of what the detour is, and what impacts it's causing in the area, and they'll find better ways to go. Now, if that means people are starting to take local streets, we're going to try and clamp down on that. But hopefully what it means, and I think a lot of people are going to do this, is they might take, we had a comment from somebody on Garden Home Road concerned about it. I think a lot of people are going to take Multnomah Boulevard to 45th rather than taking Garden Home. So you'll start to see the traffic kind of spread out to other routes. I don't know if Wendy, if you had any other thoughts on that.
No, you're on the right track there, and I did just want to mention that the first 3 to 4 weeks when we implement detours or when we change traffic patterns are always a little bit, it just takes a little time for traffic to settle and for people to find alternate routes that are better. And so I would just remind folks of that. And so, the first couple of weeks are going to be sticky, and it's just the nature of construction. And then every time, if there's like another major reconfiguration or change in traffic control, or as folks move, as construction moves down the line, there will just be some shifting around. But we do see that when we put in detours like this, that the traffic is heavy initially, and then it does disperse. People find other routes. And I live in the area, and I would second what you say, Steve, that most people who are familiar with the area will stay on Multnomah to 45th, and they will also find other routes around, so they don't have to go through that.
Great. So we have just a couple more comments and then one more question. One comment is a clarification that Handy Andy's has been recently sold and is not actually abandoned. That might have been my characterization, my apology. The next is a comment just about the excitement that this project is coming to fruition, and a thankfulness and acknowledgement that the team has been working really hard to put this plan together. The other comment that we have is, Steve, when you were referring to folks finding alternative routes, that might be a concern of the business association, that folks will find an alternative route and then might not be right at the business core due to traffic patterns. And so I wonder if you might address that issue.
Yeah, certainly, that's a good point, that, that could, for some people, maybe that does reduce a casual visit to the business district there. But I mean, I kind of feel like, if it's people that are that live in the area or that are familiar with Southwest Portland, that this shouldn't affect their patronage activities, that that some of the other aspects of their lives will probably affect that more than our project. Thankfully, this is going to be a lot less impactful than the paving project was. When I was at the Village Business Association in late May, I mentioned how, Capitol Highway northbound will get you to the village. So you'll be able to get there. And then I jokingly said that, then you won't be able to leave, but that's not true. It just makes it easier so that you'll be able to get there northbound. You'll be able to get to the village on all sides. And then people will be navigating our detour if they're heading southbound out of the village. But, we're talking about, I'm talking with Jill at the Business Association about doing another sponsorship for Multnomah Days. So we definitely care a lot about the village. It's a great place. I lived there before when I first moved to Portland. So we want to make sure we're supporting the businesses, and we encourage the other 55 participants on this Zoom call to do the same.
Great. One other question we have is, will the side streets off Capitol Highway be repaved where they meet?
Yes, to varying degrees, but all of them have at least like 15 to 25-ish feet of pavement connection. In some of those, we have to repave the connection because we're actually changing the grade a little bit, because you put in the sidewalk and it makes the road wider and it changes the grade, so we have to connect it back. So yeah, each street will get a new pavement connection to Capitol Highway, some longer than others.
Great. And then closing out our comments at the current moment, we have one appreciation for holding this open house. And then one attendee who is again asking to again, please reconsider that intersection of 45th and Brugger, and at least consider an intersection near that intersection. Or excuse me, a crosswalk near that intersection. And so it looks like in our Q&A, that concludes the comments and the questions that we've received. And I want to give a little bit of space, both to you, Stephen, to our other panelists to make any closing remarks or touch base again with any comments or questions that came up for you that you want to make sure that we address.
Great, thanks, Jen. And I think before I do that, I want to make sure when I cut out the first time, did Chris Lyons have an opportunity to ask any questions as a panelist, or was there anything that you wanted to say here towards the end, Chris?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I think the whole team here has covered all the questions I had and everything that's been put in the chat, but I'm happy to just take a second to share some comments. And first, so thrilled that we are at this point in this process. It has been a very long 5-year journey, or 30 years, depending on where you've come in as part of this project. And I just want to thank all of you, the city staff, who've been doing such great work on this. Great presentation, and also thank Mike and Jen for being here tonight. It was nice to hear your commitment to the project and to the neighborhood satisfaction with how it all goes. Obviously, this is going to really affect all of us in Southwest, but especially those of us who live on Capitol or immediately off on the side streets. And it's going to be a pretty big pain for 18 months. But as someone commented in here earlier, at the end of the day, I think these improvements are going to be astonishing for the neighborhood. And hopefully in the end, it's all going to be worth it. So just want to reiterate from the entire neighborhood, thanks to all of you for this open house. And we are very much looking forward to seeing the crews out there in just a few days.
Really appreciate those comments, Chris, and I want to thank you for your leadership on the Capitol Highway Subcommittee and engaging with us throughout this last 5 years of engineering. And everybody that has participated on that committee, or even if you haven't and you've reached out in other ways, either through the past 5 years or even before that. Folks like Marianne Fitzgerald, Don Bach, Roger Averbeck, Catherine Christensen. I'm going to leave a bunch of people out, but thank you to all of you for advocating for this project and for partnering with us during design, and for continuing to have your patience as we get into this heavy construction mode. So thank you to the neighborhood. Are there any of our other panelists that wanted to say anything?
This is Cedar. I just wanted to remind folks that there's going to be inspectors out on site. So if you do have an access issue or any other concerns, Landis and Landis is super approachable. They're really great, but city employees will be throughout, and just look for us in the city vest and we can get you where you need to go. So please don't hesitate to talk to any of the city employees. Thanks.
It's a great point, Cedar. Thank you. Anybody?
Great. Well, I'll just do a final plug. Again, this has been a terrific open house, but we want to continue to take comments and questions. And so again, if you can email us at capitalhighway@portlandoregon.gov, or call the hotline at any time. And again, that phone number is 503-823-2516. And thank you very much to everyone who participated tonight. And we're very excited to start this project.
And thank you for bearing with my technical issues. Thanks to the panelists and everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.